My rich family spent my whole life calling me a mistake. My father said I ruined their perfect future. My mother smiled in public while treating me like a burden behind closed doors. Then my grandparents died and left me $28 million instead of them. That was when the revenge started. My father tried to throw me out of my apartment within 72 hours. My mother stole jewelry before her own mother was buried. My brother kept calling me emotional while they secretly tried to take everything back. But they never knew my grandparents had recorded the truth before they died. At 10:42 that night, I watched security footage expose my entire family inside my grandmother's bedroom. A few months later, investors were demanding audits, family accounts were collapsing, and the people who treated me like nothing were finally facing consequences they could not control. My name is Celeste Mercer, and this is how my family's perfect image destroyed itself. Chapter 1. The smell of crayons, dry erase markers, and peanut butter crackers clung to my classroom every afternoon. Most days, I barely noticed it anymore. It was just part of my life, same as the chipped coffee mug on my desk and the stack of spelling quizzes waiting to be graded. My students were supposed to be napping after lunch, but half of them were whispering under their blankets anyway. One little boy kept making dinosaur noises every few minutes, while a girl near the windows quietly colored rainbows into the corners of her math worksheet. Normal. Everything about my life was painfully normal. I was kneeling beside a bookshelf, helping a student tape the torn cover back onto a library book, when my phone buzzed against the desk. I almost ignored it. Nobody important ever called me during school hours. Then I saw the name, Martin Feldman. My stomach tightened immediately. Martin had handled my grandparents' legal affairs for years. He used to come to Sunday dinners carrying store-bought cookies my grandmother pretended to hate. I picked up the phone and stepped into the hallway. His voice sounded strange, too careful. "Celeste, where are you right now?" "At work. Why?" A long pause followed. "Your grandparents were in an accident outside Cincinnati this morning." The hallway suddenly felt too bright. Martin kept talking, but after the word fatal, everything started sounding far away. I leaned against the wall beside the drinking fountain while kids laughed somewhere behind the classroom door. Theodore and Eleanor Mercer were gone. I thought I would cry instantly. Instead, the first thought that entered my head was so selfish it made me hate myself. I do not have a home anymore. Not a house, a home. Because my grandparents were the only people in my family who ever made me feel like I belonged anywhere. I drove back to Columbus that night in silence. Rain tapped softly against the windshield of my old Honda Civic, while the engine made the same rattling sound it had been making for months. My grandfather kept offering me another car. I always told him no. Now I wished I had let him. The funeral was held 3 days later at St. Andrew Church downtown. The Mercer family arrived looking like grief had been professionally styled for them. My father stepped out of a black Mercedes wearing a tailored charcoal coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. People moved toward him automatically. Men shook his hand, women touched his arm softly while telling him how sorry they were. Victor Mercer knew exactly how to perform tragedy in public. My mother was no different. Cynthia wore pearls, black cashmere gloves, and the same controlled expression she used at charity galas instead of burying her parents. Meanwhile, Brandon stood near the church entrance checking his phone every 30 seconds. Nobody noticed me until I was standing directly beside them. That was normal too. I spent most of my life feeling invisible inside my own family. Brandon was the golden child. Brandon played varsity lacrosse. Brandon majored in finance. Brandon got praised for ordering expensive whiskey correctly at business dinners before he was even old enough to drink legally. I became a public school teacher. I still remember the silence at dinner the night I told my parents. Then my father laughed. Not loud, worse, just enough to make me feel small. You want to spend your life making the same salary some people spend on vacation tips. My mother sighed like I had announced I wanted to join a traveling circus. Then my grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Some people build companies, sweetheart. Some people build people. My grandfather smiled at me from the other end of the table, and the second one matters more. Nobody had ever defended me that quickly before. At the funeral reception, people kept talking about my grandparents like they were discussing stock portfolios. The Mercer estate must be enormous. I heard the logistics company alone is worth millions. Victor will probably expand everything now. I stood near the coffee station holding a paper cup nobody bothered filling for me. My mother passed directly beside me without asking if I was okay. But I watched her spend 5 full minutes comforting a woman she barely knew from her country club. That hurt more than I expected. I stepped outside behind the church just to breathe. Cold October air hit my face while traffic moved slowly along the wet street. For a second, I could almost hear my grandfather laughing while teaching me to change a tire in his driveway when I was 16. You never wait around for someone else to rescue you, Celeste. My grandmother saved every drawing my students ever made for her. Her refrigerator looked like an elementary school hallway. Nobody else in my family cared about stories from my classroom. My grandparents asked about every single student by name. 2 months before they died, I had dinner with them at their old cedar house outside Columbus. My grandmother made pot roast, while my grandfather pretended to complain about it just to make her roll her eyes. When I left that night, Theodore stopped me on the porch. If one day I am not here anymore, promise me something. I laughed. That depends on what it is. Promise me you will stay kind even when people give you reasons not to be. At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now the memory felt heavy. 2 weeks after the funeral, Martin called everyone to his office for the reading of the will. Rain streaked down the windows overlooking downtown Columbus, while my father sat confidently at the head of the conference table. My mother already looked relaxed. Brandon leaned back in his chair like the outcome had been decided years ago. Martin adjusted his glasses and opened the file. He began listing the assets: Mercer Freight and Logistics, commercial properties, investment accounts, trust funds, liquid assets totaling approximately $28.4 million. I felt the atmosphere in the room shift. My father folded his hands together slowly. And who exactly will oversee the estate? Martin looked directly at me. Then he closed the folder. The entire estate will be transferred to one individual. Chapter 2. For one strange second, nobody reacted at all. Rain crawled down the glass windows behind Martin while the air conditioner hummed softly overhead. My father sat perfectly still at the head of the table, staring at Martin like he had spoken another language. Then Brandon laughed. Not because anything was funny, because rich people laugh when they think reality is about to correct itself. "Come on," he said, "seriously." Martin did not blink. "Your grandparents were very specific in their instructions." My mother's face drained of color almost instantly. "No," she said quietly, "that is not possible." My father finally moved. His chair scraped hard against the floor as he stood. "Absolutely not." People outside the conference room glanced toward the noise. I could barely feel my hands anymore. $28.4 million. The company, the trusts, the properties, everything, left to me. It felt less like winning something and more like standing in the path of a truck that had not hit me yet. Brandon leaned forward slowly, staring at me like he had never seen me before. "What did you do?" His voice came out low and sharp. "You were always hanging around them. You filled their heads with something." I swallowed hard. "I did not do anything." My father let out a cold laugh. "Please, Dad barely understood how to use his television remote the last few years." Martin calmly reached for a remote control on the table. Actually, Theodore anticipated this conversation. The screen behind him flickered on. Then my grandparents appeared, sitting together on the floral couch in their living room. My grandmother looked nervous in front of the camera. My grandfather looked tired but completely aware of everything around him. My chest tightened immediately. "If you are watching this," Eleanor began, softly, "then we are probably gone." The room went dead silent. My father crossed his arms tightly. Theodore leaned forward. "We understand this decision may upset some members of the family." Brandon scoffed under his breath. "But we did not make it suddenly," my grandfather continued. "We made it carefully." My grandmother looked directly into the camera then. "Celeste is the only person who ever walked through our front door wanting nothing from us." I felt heat rise into my face. My father shook his head. "This is manipulation." Martin ignored him. The video continued. "Sweetheart," my grandmother said softly, "if anyone tries to make you feel guilty for this, remember something. Love that has to be earned is not really love." The screen went black. Silence settled over the room again, heavier this time. Then my father exploded. "She manipulated them." His voice cracked through the conference room so loudly that even the receptionist outside looked up. "You spent years turning them against us." I finally forced myself to speak. "I never asked them for anything." Brandon laughed again. "Exactly. That was your whole act. Quiet little school teacher Celeste who never wanted anything." Martin folded his hands calmly. "Your parents completed cognitive evaluations twice over the last 2 years. Both confirmed they were mentally competent when these decisions were made." My father looked at him with pure hatred. Then he turned toward me. "You are coming to the house tonight." It was not a suggestion, and somehow, despite everything, I nodded. Part of me still wanted this to become fixable. That was the pathetic truth I hated admitting even to myself. I drove to my parents' estate in Bexley just after sunset. The Mercer house sat glowing at the end of a curved driveway lined with lantern lights and perfectly trimmed hedges. Valet attendants from the funeral reception were still removing floral arrangements near the front entrance. White roses, imported orchids, flowers that probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. My father cared deeply about appearances. Inside, the dining room looked less like a family space and more like a corporate boardroom. Folders covered the table. Legal documents, trust agreements, financial statements. My brother stood near the bar pouring bourbon into crystal glasses like he already owned the room. Nobody offered me one. Nobody even asked if I wanted water. My mother glanced at my black dress and wrinkled coat before looking away again. "You could have changed before coming here," she said quietly. There it was, even now, even tonight, still embarrassed by me. My father remained standing at the end of the table while the rest of us sat. The room shifted around him automatically whenever he spoke. People stopped moving. Brandon straightened his posture. My mother went silent. That was who Victor Mercer was, a man who controlled rooms without raising his voice. "You are overwhelmed right now," he said finally, "which is understandable, but you have absolutely no idea what you are holding in your hands." He slid a stack of papers toward me. Transfer of estate authority, temporary control agreements, operational voting rights for Mercer Freight and Logistics. I stared at the paperwork. "You already prepared all this?" "Of course we did," Brandon snapped. "Somebody in this family has to think practically." My father rubbed his stairhead slowly. "The company has freight contracts across 4 states. We already have investors nervous about rising transportation costs. If people hear my daughter inherited everything and she teaches 3rd grade for a living, it becomes a joke." A joke. That was what I was to him. My mother leaned forward gently, using that same fake soft voice she used with donors. "Sweetheart, nobody is trying to hurt you. You will still be comfortable. We simply need to protect the family image." Family image, not family. Image. Brandon took another drink. "Do you even know how much money it takes to maintain this house alone?" I looked around the dining room. The massive chandelier, the polished marble floors, the expensive artwork nobody actually looked at. Then I thought about my tiny apartment and the stack of unpaid utility bills sitting on my kitchen counter. My father pushed a pen toward me. "Sign the papers, Celeste." My hands started trembling. Part of me wanted to, not because I trusted them, because I was tired. Tired of feeling like the unwanted daughter at every table. Tired of fighting for scraps of affection that never came. Then I remembered my grandfather sitting on that couch. Celeste loved us like we were people. I slowly pushed the documents back toward my father. No. Nobody moved. Brandon stared at me in disbelief. My mother's expression hardened instantly. Victor leaned closer until his face was only inches from mine. My eyes burned, but this time I did not look away. Maybe I never really was. Chapter 3. Nobody followed me when I walked out of the Mercer estate. No one called my name. No one asked me to stay. The front door closed behind me with a heavy sound that echoed through the marble entryway, while cold rain soaked through my coat almost instantly. The mansion still glowed warmly behind me. Golden lights, perfect landscaping, expensive stone walkways shining under the storm. Beautiful from the outside. That was the Mercer family. My hands shook while I searched for my keys. I dropped them once on the wet driveway while crouched down to grab them while rain soaked through my sleeves. My phone buzzed before I even got into the car. Brandon. I ignored it. Another message appeared immediately. "You are humiliating Dad." Then another. "You have no idea what you are doing." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Not once did either of them ask if I was okay. I drove back toward Columbus through wet streets and blurred headlights while my chest felt hollow. Downtown traffic crawled through the rain, red brake lights smearing across the windshield. At a stoplight near High Street, another notification appeared. RMC Property Holdings LLC. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the subject line. Immediate lease termination notice. My stomach dropped so hard it hurt. I pulled into an empty pharmacy parking lot and opened the email with shaking hands. Effective immediately, your month-to-month lease agreement is terminated. Failure to vacate within 72 hours may result in formal eviction proceedings. Security personnel will supervise the move-out process. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen while rain pounded against the roof of my Honda. Then it hit me. My father owned my apartment building. Not directly, of course. Victor Mercer never attached his own name to ugly things. There was always another company, another layer, another polished corporate mask. But suddenly, everything made sense. The discounted rent, the fast approval process, maintenance arriving almost immediately every time something broke. He had never helped me live independently. He had just kept me somewhere he could still control. My phone buzzed again. Voicemail from Victor. 3 unread texts from Brandon. 1 missed call from my mother. I ignored all of them. When I finally reached my apartment building, a security guard stood near the elevator pretending not to watch me. A curtain moved in one of the first-floor windows. People already knew. Humiliation crawled slowly up my throat. The guard gave me an awkward nod. "I am sorry, ma'am." That almost broke me, because a stranger seemed more uncomfortable about this than my own family. Inside the apartment, I stood in the middle of the living room staring around like I'd never seen it before. The crooked lamp beside the couch, stacks of spelling tests waiting to be graded, teacher supplies piled near the kitchen table, unpaid bills beside grocery receipts. This was my whole life. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive, just real. My phone buzzed again. Brandon, Dad can still fix this if you stop acting emotional. I threw the phone onto the couch hard enough to knock papers onto the floor. Then I started packing. Not valuables, the important things. My grandmother's quilt from freshman year of college, birthday cards from students, a shoebox filled with handwritten letters Eleanor mailed me over the years, a cheap Christmas ornament Theodore bought because he said it looked lonely sitting by itself on the shelf. Every meaningful thing I owned fit into cardboard boxes. Not one important memory in my life involved money. Around 9 that night, someone knocked on the door. For one stupid second, I thought maybe my mother had come to apologize. It was Victor. He stood there wearing a dark wool coat, damp from the rain, calm as always, controlled as always, like this was another unpleasant conversation he needed to finish before bed. His eyes moved slowly across the apartment. The old couch, the chipped kitchen counter, the school supplies stacked beside the dining table. Disappointment covered his face. You could have had a different life. I crossed my arms tightly. I liked my life. No, he said quietly, you settled for it. That landed harder than I expected. He stepped farther inside without asking. The apartment suddenly felt even smaller around him. I tried to help you, Celeste. You are evicting me. I am protecting family assets. The fact that he said it so calmly made it worse. No anger, no yelling, just cold certainty. Then he looked at me for a long moment and sighed. Your mother and I were happy before you came along. Everything inside me froze. What? He said the next part like he was discussing taxes. We were young. Brandon was enough. Then suddenly there was another child we never planned for. I could barely breathe. He said the next part like he was discussing taxes. You were an accident. Silence filled the apartment. Thunder rolled outside somewhere, far away. I stared at him, waiting for some sign he regretted saying it. There was none. Finally, I whispered, "Why would you tell me that?" His expression barely changed. Because maybe then you will finally understand why this family cannot survive another mistake. Then he walked out, just like that. I don't remember carrying the last boxes downstairs. I only remember the security guard helping me load them into the trunk while rain soaked through my sweater. At some point, I started crying so hard I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see the road. No home, no family, no place left that wanted me. Then my hand brushed against the small brass key hanging from my keychain. Theodore gave it to me years ago. This house belongs to you, too. I drove north through the storm toward the cedar house outside Columbus. The porch light glowed softly through the trees when I finally pulled into the driveway. The second I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Cinnamon, coffee, old cedar wood. I nearly collapsed in the entryway because the house still smelled like them. The cuckoo clock ticked softly in the living room. For the first time in days, I felt safe enough to breathe. The next morning, I woke up under my grandmother's quilt on the couch. Someone knocked gently at the front door. Martin Feldman stood outside holding coffee and a paper bag from my grandfather's favorite bakery. You probably forgot to eat, he said softly. I let him inside. He carried 2 storage boxes into the dining room and placed them carefully on the table. Folders, bank records, printed emails, handwritten journals. A chill moved through me. What is all this? Martin removed his glasses slowly. Your grandparents spent years preparing for the possibility that Victor would eventually turn against you. My stomach tightened. He opened one folder after another.
Loans Victor never repaid. Private transfers covering failed investments. Notes Eleanor wrote after arguments with Cynthia. Then Martin went quiet for several seconds. There's something else. He reached into his briefcase and removed a flash drive. Theodore installed security cameras in this house last year. I stared at him. Martin hesitated before plugging the drive into his laptop. They believed Victor and Cynthia might try to take things after the funeral. The screen lit up. Then I watched my mother open my grandmother's hidden safe while my father stood by the door, keeping watch.
Chapter 4. I could not stop staring at the screen. My mother moved through my grandmother's bedroom carefully, almost casually, lifting velvet jewelry boxes from the hidden safe behind the painting near the fireplace while my father stood guard beside the door. Like they had done things like this before. My grandmother's sapphire bracelet caught the light when Cynthia held it up. "I always loved this piece," she whispered. My father barely looked at her. "Hurry up." Something inside me cracked open then. Not grief. That part had already burned itself empty. This was anger, cold and sharp and finally impossible to ignore. That bracelet was Theodore's anniversary gift to Eleanor after 40 years of marriage. I remembered her wearing it every Christmas Eve while flour dust covered the front of her sweater and pies cooled across the kitchen counters. Now my mother was dropping it into her purse before the funeral flowers had even started dying. Martin quietly paused the video. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The cuckoo clock ticked softly from the living room while rain tapped against the cedar house windows. Finally, I asked, "How long have they been like this?" Martin rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Longer than your grandparents wanted to believe." For the first time since the funeral, I stopped feeling heartbroken. I started feeling awake. Martin looked directly at me. "Theodore and Eleanor did not leave you money, Celeste. They left you the truth." That sentence stayed with me the rest of the day. People started arriving at the house one after another that afternoon. Luis Ortega showed up first carrying a dented red toolbox, even though nothing in the house needed repairs. He had worked alongside Theodore for nearly 30 years, managing warehouse maintenance for Mercer Freight. The second he saw me, he wrapped both arms around me tightly. "Your grandfather would be proud of you." My throat tightened instantly. Nobody in my family had ever said words like that to me. Miriam Brooks arrived next, carrying 2 casseroles wrapped carefully in dish towels. She had helped Eleanor around the house for years, and still smelled faintly like lavender and church perfume. The second she saw my face, her expression softened. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "you have barely slept." She noticed immediately. My own mother never did. Rosa Delgado came after that, still wearing sharp business clothes from downtown Columbus, followed by Harold Patel carrying folders thick enough to bend in his hands. The house felt strange suddenly, still sad, still heavy, but no longer empty. People stayed in the kitchen drinking coffee while thunder rolled quietly outside. Luis stared into his cup for a long time before finally speaking. Victor changed after the company started growing. Nobody interrupted him. Luis sighed heavily. "About 2 years ago, I heard him screaming at Theodore inside Warehouse 4. I looked up slowly. What did he say?" Luis hesitated. That he could not wait for the old man to die so he could finally take what belonged to him. Miriam closed her eyes briefly like the words physically hurt. Harold opened one of the folders. "There are financial issues your grandfather spent years hiding from public view." He explained everything simply. Victor lost nearly $500,000 in a failed commercial real estate development near Dayton in 2021. Instead of reporting the losses honestly, he quietly borrowed against company credit lines, using Theodore's reputation to calm investors and extend repayment deadlines. If this information becomes public, Harold said carefully. Victor's image as a stable businessman collapses very quickly. Image. Everything in my family always came back to image. Miriam handed me one of Eleanor's journals. The pages smelled faintly like my grandmother's perfume. Some entries were small things. Celeste brought pumpkin bread after school today. Theodore forgot where he left his reading glasses again. Then the writing slowly changed. Victor asked for another transfer. Cynthia only visits when charity cameras are involved. Brandon called because he needs money again. My chest tightened harder with every page. Then one sentence stopped me completely. I am terrified of the day Celeste realizes she was never loved correctly by these people. I closed the journal because my hands started shaking again. Not from sadness anymore, from clarity. That night Brandon texted me, "We're coming tomorrow morning." No apology, no shame, just entitlement, like they still believed this house belonged to them. The next morning the Cedar house felt unnaturally quiet. Coffee brewed softly in the kitchen while gray rain clouds hung low outside the windows. Even the ticking clock sounded tense. Martin arrived early carrying another stack of files. About an hour later, 2 more cars pulled into the driveway. Judge Walter Bennett stepped carefully onto the porch with a cane in one hand. Theodore had known him for over 40 years. Chief Angela Ruiz arrived minutes later carrying bakery boxes from downtown. Neither came as legal representatives. They came because they loved my grandparents. That mattered more. At 10:30 sharp, black headlights appeared through the rain. My stomach tightened immediately. Victor's Mercedes rolled slowly into the driveway. Another car stopped behind him. Brandon climbed out first wearing an expensive gray coat and sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. My mother followed behind him carefully, pearls already perfect in place. Even now she looked prepared for photographs. Nobody moved when they entered the house. Victor stopped almost immediately after walking into the dining room. For the first time in my entire life, he looked uncertain. Judge Walter Bennett sat quietly beside the fireplace. Angela Ruiz leaned against the kitchen counter sipping coffee. Luis stood near the hallway with his arms crossed. Rosa looked openly disgusted. Harold already had documents spread across the dining room table. My father glanced around the room slowly. The balance had changed. Nobody looked intimidated by him anymore. That unsettled him more than anger would have. "What exactly is this?" he asked coldly. Martin stayed calm. A conversation Theodore wanted everyone to have. Brandon scoffed loudly. "Oh, come on." Harold slid several documents across the table. "These are records connected to the Dayton losses and the private transfers Theodore used to protect the company." Victor's jaw tightened instantly. Judge Walter Bennett finally spoke from his chair. "Theodore was mentally sharp until the day he died, Victor. Nobody is going to pretend otherwise." My mother looked pale now. Rosa folded her arms tightly. "Cruel is stealing from your dead mother before the funeral flowers are gone." Cynthia's face completely collapsed. For the first time ever, her perfect mask cracked in front of other people. Martin reached for the laptop. No more lies. Then he pressed play. The footage filled the room again. Nobody spoke while my mother emptied the safe. Nobody moved while my father watched the hallway. Brandon looked physically sick. My mother's mascara started running slowly beneath her eyes. Finally, she whispered, "Please turn it off." Martin did not move. Victor stared at the screen silently, but I could see it happening behind his eyes. The realization, the understanding that everyone in this room now saw exactly who he really was. I stood up slowly. For the first time in my entire life, my voice did not shake around them. I looked directly at my father. "You never wanted a daughter. You wanted somebody obedient." His face hardened immediately. Then I turned toward my mother.
"You do not love people, you love appearances." She started crying harder. Real or fake, I honestly no longer cared. Finally, I looked at Brandon. "You never saw Grandpa and Grandma as human beings, only as people who could pay your bills." Nobody answered me. The silence was enough. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Cold rain air drifted through the house. Then I looked at my family one last time. It's over now. Nobody moved. Please leave my grandparents' house.
Chapter 5. The house stayed quiet for a long time after they left. Not the cold kind of quiet I grew up with. Not the silence that came from people pretending not to say what they really felt. This was different. Peaceful. Rain tapped softly against the cedar house windows as everyone slowly settled back into their chairs around the dining room table. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Nobody forced conversation just to make themselves comfortable. For the first time in my life, I realized calm and loneliness were not the same thing. Martin poured himself another cup of coffee and looked over at me carefully. "You all right?" I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 29 years. "I think so." Judge Bennett gave me a small nod from beside the fireplace. "Theodore would be proud of you today." That almost broke me harder than everything else combined, because deep down, all I had ever wanted was to feel like somebody in that family saw me clearly. The weeks after that passed more quietly than I expected. No more late-night voicemails from Victor demanding explanations. No more cold family dinners where every sentence felt dangerous. No more walking into rooms wondering if I was embarrassing someone just by existing there. That part alone changed something inside me. Healing did not happen all at once, though. Some nights I still woke up hearing my father's voice in my head. "You were an accident." Certain sentences settle into your bones whether you want them to or not. One night, I stood alone in the kitchen at nearly 2 a.m. staring at one of Eleanor's coffee mugs while tears rolled down my face, for reasons I could not fully explain. Miriam found me there a few minutes later wearing slippers and a faded robe. She wrapped her arms around me without saying anything. That was the thing I slowly started learning after everything collapsed. Real love usually sounds quieter than manipulation. Martin helped me handle the estate little by little over the next several months. Harold Patel taught me things Theodore had wanted me to understand years earlier: how trust structures worked, why certain properties mattered, how Mercer Freight had actually been built, not through fear, not through intimidation, through loyalty, through people trusting Theodore enough to stay when things became difficult. One afternoon, Rosa Delgado sat with me on the back porch while autumn wind pushed leaves across the yard. "Your grandfather never cared about looking powerful," she said. "He cared about whether people sleeping under his payroll felt safe feeding their families." I thought about that for days afterward. Victor spent his entire life chasing control. Theodore spent his building stability. That difference explained everything. About 4 months after the funeral, Harold helped me officially establish the Theodore and Eleanor Mercer Foundation. $12 million from the estate went directly into it. Public school classroom grants, scholarships across Ohio, winter meal programs for children, emergency supply funds for teachers paying for notebooks and pencils from their own salaries. The first board meeting happened around the cedar dining room table with coffee cups, pie crumbs, and paperwork spread everywhere. No photographers, no charity gala speeches, no giant checks for social media. Just people trying to do something useful. And despite everything that changed, I kept teaching. People seemed confused by that. One reporter from Columbus even asked why I still worked in a public elementary school after inheriting millions. I remember looking at her and thinking the answer felt obvious, because teaching was never the thing that made me feel small. My third graders still argued over crayons and forgot homework assignments and hugged me around the waist hard enough to nearly knock me over every morning. That part of my life never felt stopping feeling real. A few weeks before Christmas break, one of my students named Noah stayed behind after class while the other children lined up for buses. He kept tugging awkwardly at the sleeves of his hoodie while trying not to look at me directly. Then I noticed the front of his sneakers. The soles were splitting apart almost completely. I recognized that kind of embarrassment immediately. Children try very hard to hide poverty from other children. Years ago, I would have noticed and gone home feeling helpless afterward. This time was different. The next morning, a new winter coat and a pair of boots sat quietly beside Noah's desk before class started. No note, no announcement, no public moment designed to make me feel generous. Noah stared at them silently for several seconds before looking up at me with watery eyes. I just smiled and started writing spelling words on the board like nothing unusual had happened. That moment stayed with me longer than any inheritance meeting ever could. Life inside the Cedar house changed slowly, too. Luis rebuilt Eleanor's garden in the spring because he said roses deserved another chance after hard winters. Miriam finally taught me how to make my grandmother's apple pie without burning the crust. Rosa started coming over every Sunday evening carrying wine and stories Theodore probably wouldn't have wanted repeated out loud. Martin played chess on the back porch with Judge Bennett, while Angela Ruiz loudly accused both of them of cheating every single week. The house sounded alive again, not performative, not polished, real. One afternoon, I saw a magazine article while standing in line at the grocery store. Victor Mercer steps away from public leadership amid financial questions. Smaller headline underneath. Mercer freight investors request independent audit. I stared at the cover for a few seconds before quietly putting it back on the rack. No triumph, no satisfaction, just distance. A few months later, I heard Cynthia stopped appearing at most charity events downtown after rumors about the family spread through Columbus social circles. Brandon apparently sold his condo outside Dublin and took a finance job in Cleveland. For the first time in his life, nobody was paying his bills for him. Funny enough, I didn't hate any of them anymore. That surprised me most. One evening, almost a year after the funeral, I sat alone on the wooden swing Theodore built beneath the giant oak tree behind the house. The air smelled like rain and leaves again, almost exactly like the night I thought my life was ending. Warm light spilled from the kitchen windows behind me, while laughter drifted softly across the yard. People moving around, dishes clattering, someone arguing over pie crust inside the kitchen. For most of my life, I thought being invisible meant there was something wrong with me. Now I finally understood something different. Victor did not throw me out of a loving family. He pushed me away from a place that never truly knew how to love anybody correctly. My grandparents didn't leave me $28 million. They left me a home. They left me people who stayed. And for the first time in my life, I no longer felt invisible. If you've ever felt unseen inside your own family, I hope you remember this. Your worth is not measured by how poorly someone else failed to love you. And if this story meant something to you, I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts below.